Hello, Fatih. How are you?
Hi, Kara. I don't know why Zoom doesn't expect system settings when it uses microphone and speaker. It's like always it changes to default like the Mac. Yeah, that's what I was dealing with when you said hi. Oh, how are things?
Good. Feeling pretty good about a lot. I'm really psyched for this meeting. I'm really glad that Anders is going to join us, actually. I feel like that'll be
He just responded to that issue on the interop repo.
Oh, okay, on the quality gates. Sweet.
Yeah, and he is here. Hi, Anders. Hi from Stockholm. Hi, Matthias. From Linköping. So, Anders, Matthias is from Linköping, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm from Linköping.
Yeah. So we are 3 people from Sweden.
Oh, hey.
I'm the outlier, huh? London.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Okay, great. Yeah, I just got these new headphones, so it's still a new experience.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here. Let's see here.
We'll maybe give it a few more moments while we wait for everyone to roll in, a few more people. Ooh, I hadn't seen your response till now, but I guess we'll discuss it as a group on the GitHub issue. Anders.
All right. Yeah, I just kind of got my notes in there before the meeting. So, but
thank you.
So now you know what I'm about to say here.
Good. So how is everything in Sweden?
Well, I feel positive because longer daylight and we had some sun like last week or something. I know, Anders, you know better than me. I am new to Sweden, like 10 years. I consider new.
Oh, you're new here?
Yeah, like 10 years, but you know, I wasn't born here, so you may know how Sweden treats people weather-wise better than me.
Ah, okay, yeah. Yeah, this is it's starting to get lighter, which is really what I care most about.
Yeah, the winters must be tough.
Yeah.
Even in the UK, I'm amazed at how early it gets dark.
Yeah, it's the darkness it's really gets to you. Like I can deal with the weather. I'm so used to it, but
Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Hi there. Doing okay. How are you?
Good.
I think I jumped in to talk of the weather. It just snowed here yesterday, so I was out shoveling, but nothing compared to darkness and feet of snow over there.
Where are you based?
I'm in Durango, Colorado, so southwest corner. Yeah.
Do you ski?
Yeah. A little. I mean, I did when I was young. Here in Denver, it's kind of difficult to get to skiing. There's like one road and everyone's on it. So if you really want to go skiing, you need to go during the week and get up really early to go. So I haven't done as much skiing since I've been here, but
fair enough.
Yeah. And where are you at?
I'm in London.
In London. Okay, cool.
Stockholm here.
Stockholm.
Another Stockholm.
Ah, nice. I'm going to be in Stockholm for the first time in February. or in sorry, May.
Oh.
For a J Focus. It was going to be in February and then got moved to May.
Don't come here February. It's not what I wanted to say. May is
Would have been an experience.
Where were you coming? Was it J Focus or?
Yes, J Focus.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm excited. I've never been before. Be cool.
Yeah, I used to be a Java developer, so I've been to a few of those.
Nice. You used to be. That's not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it wasn't Java. It was just other jobs and other requirements and so on. So, and I'm more on the like advocacy side of things now.
That's kind of the direction I went to. So
yeah. So yeah, no hard feelings towards Java.
Same.
Great, we might as well get started. Since Anders is joining us for the second time today, but we do have a number of, maybe we should go around and introduce ourselves.
I'll go first. My name's Justin Abrams, and I'm an architect at eBay, and I help teams ship code better, faster, safer, hence my involvement. Melissa.
All right. I'm Melissa McKay. I am with JFrog right now. I've been with JFrog now for 2 years as a developer advocate. And prior to that, I was a developer and software engineer at various companies. Primarily Java server side was my expertise, but I rarely meet a Java developer these days that aren't doing other things now. Go, Python, obviously a lot of shell scripting. The more we get involved in DevOps, the more we need to learn other things. So those are my interests right now, and definitely enjoying the advocacy role.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm Anders. I'm a developer advocate at Styra, which is the company behind the Open Policy Agent project, which is a graduated Cloud Native Computing Foundation project focused on policy offering, policy enforcement across the whole kind of stack. And I have a background in development and primarily focused on kind of identity, security. So.
Well, next, Fatih Dermenci from Ericsson Software Technology, developer in CI/CD infrastructure areas, and lately looking into software supply chain aspects based in Stockholm, Sweden. So that's me. And interoperability is like one of the areas I spent years. So it's like kind of, yeah.
I can go next. Yep. Matthias Nutter. You work for Ericsson in Linköping. Working with developer with CI/CD. Have half of my time working with open source things, both here interoperability, but also the SIG events, the seed events products, and also a full product. And other times it's internal CI/CD in Ericsson.
I guess that leaves me. I'm known in the real world as Jeremy Stanley. I'm one of the systems administrators for the Open Dev Collaboratory and a maintainer on the Zool project gating CI/CD system.
Great. I'm Cara Delamarque. I work at the CDF and co-chair of the SIG. I guess having said that, I'll say that Fatih is stepping down as co-chair. Fatih is the best co-chair ever. So I'm very, very, very sad. But we are looking for another one, and we have some people interested. So yeah, great. So look forward to that. It should be good. And we have Anders here today to present to us. But before we get to that, we'll just quickly go over some of our. I'll share some of our action items. I think we're all done from last week. I've invited Anders. Yay. Justin has made this amazing issue, which is fantastic, on quality gates, which Anders has already very nicely, and others have already commented on. So we'll go over that probably after Anders.
Yeah, I wasn't really ready to do a presentation. I thought I wouldn't, but
okay, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to do, yeah, because I said to you, just come discuss with us. It's not.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was prepared for now. But if you want a presentation, like, I'd be happy to give you one at a later date.
Okay, that's fine. We won't worry about that at all today. I mean, the presentation, we're just really happy to have you here and to discuss quality gates with us. Justin, do you want to start the conversation, since you raised it and you created the issue as well?
Yeah, so when developers commit their code, we want it to go to production, but we want that to happen safely. And different organizations have different understandings of what safe means. And I'm curious about what things we do to increase safety as we move from the left side of the pipeline to the right side of the pipeline. And yeah, so these are the ones that eBay does. During the build, we check for CVEs in the dependencies we see, do unit tests, contract tests, and then like code quality gates. Code quality checks are a soft gate. They're like a, hey, don't merge this PR, it's got tons of bugs, and not a, you may not deploy. Then we deploy to a temporary environment and run end-to-end tests against it. Push to a staging server that's a shared resource across eBay that many people depend on, and repeat. And then we do a prod deploy. That prod deploy does a canary rollout and monitors a handful of health signals.
That is great. Can I just ask, so these various checks, all these steps that you have here, are these what you would consider to be all part of your quality gates, all of the piece?
I would consider all of those to be quality gates.
Okay. Just
Possible
clarifying.
exception of quality checks for code that's a soft gate.
Yeah.
It might just be something different. But.
Fatih.
Yeah, as I noted in the last paragraph, I think this is like a mix of various things I've seen in various communities, and I also like seen used by my colleagues. And the difference, I don't know if I should call it a difference, but this looks at quality gates from a bit different angle, like where you put those gates, if I must put it that way. Like you can gate things before they hit main development branch by getting merged, which could be commit or change on Git, or pull request on GitHub, or merge request on GitLab. And as you all know, some of those checks, like these checks, should be fast in nature, so you give quick feedback to developers, and there are gates post-merge doing things once a commit gets merged to main development branch, and then there are checks periodically run, and then I think, I don't remember what was under periodic. Let's look at it. Yeah, some production type of checks, release checks, and so on. And again, like, even though everyone is focused on security and speed and those things, there are things that takes humongous time to run, like stability, robustness, characteristics type of tests, and they are kind of on the right-hand side of the flow, because they take ages, and sometimes you can't do much about them because we have regulatory requirements which you must run in Taiko, for example, traffic for 48 hours before you can consider that as eligible for release, for example. And one thing Tan highlighted there, which is something I missed, and I don't know how I missed it, especially in open infra community, there is a check before the commit gets merged, doing some kind of speculative merging to make sure whatever ends up being merged on the main development branch actually works in a way they are merged, or they are like merged. And this is coming from Zool project, like this speculative merging. And Jeremy is here. I shouldn't talk more about those things that I don't know much about.
I can elaborate on that a little bit, but basically the design of the project gating system that we write is it's focused on preventing errors from getting into the trunk of your revision control system. So our view on this is that you should never allow errors to merge in the first place. That testing things post merge is kind of a waste, because you wind up with developers pointing fingers at each other, arguing whose fault it is. Nobody gets around to fixing things. They're there forever. Nobody can easily continue to do their development work because now the trunk is broken and they're having to pin to some older commit, or they can't bisect things reliably. So we basically don't consider there to be soft and hard gates. All gates are gates that prevent changes from being allowed to ever merge, and we enforce that by having the project gating system be the only thing that's allowed to merge changes. So people don't merge changes to get repositories. People propose changes, people review changes, people approve changes, but the gating system is what decides that the change will or won't merge. And in order to avoid deadlocks, it borrows a concept from processor design, the idea of speculative execution and pipelines. So it tests all of the changes serialized in the order in which they got approved, but it parallelizes all of the testing so that it can not have to wait for all the tests for one change to complete before the next changes started testing. And then if for some reason a proposed and approved change fails testing, then it's removed from the sequence, and all of the changes that were sequenced behind it get their testing restarted, so that we don't waste test resources for things unnecessarily. But yeah, that's the basic idea behind the project gating.
Thanks, Jeremy, for info. But yeah, it's like, again, as I know, there is mix of things from various places.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I tried to add some items to the existing bullet points here. Given like how OPA is, it's in case people aren't familiar with what the Open Policy Agent is. It's a general purpose policy engine. So you're gonna provide it policies, and then you can query OPA for decisions. So you can this is commonly used for things like authorization, where you say like, okay, any doctor should be able to to see the medical records of their patients, but only of their own patients, and only when on duty, or so on. So that would be an example of a policy. And of course, like, policy is a pretty generic term, and that's what we kind of try and take advantage of when building OPA, so that you can use one technology and one policy language to describe policy in pretty much any kind of field. So yeah, one of those fields is of course like CI/CD and deployments, and build and deployment pipelines, where you might want to have like policy determine whether a build or a deployment should be allowed or not, or if there's like additional obligations and so on. So yeah, so that's kind of the angle from which I see things. And yeah, so I just added some things here where we see like OPA being used in this context. And again, Cara, I'd be happy to give a more like formal presentation at some point. I talked, I think it was in June or so last year, presented some on OPA, and I'd be happy to do that again. But of course, some common things we see policies written for is like application misconfiguration. Things like that you can't like deploy a crazy amount of replicas for your service, that you don't run your containers as root, you don't have host mounts, so on. Like fundamental like security checks, but I think like even more commonly, it's just to catch common mistakes that people do. And of course, in recent years, we see a lot of people using policy for their infrastructure. Of course, like infrastructure, with infrastructure treated as code, that code too needs to go through like the same kind of build and deployment pipelines that we normally use for application deployment. So the kind of same rules, the same tool applies, and the same rule applies. So that's another common thing to do, like make sure that you don't expose your, I don't know, S3 buckets to the public. Ensure you don't run on like instance types that aren't like appropriate for your application, and any type of security configuration like firewalls and so on. And then there's another classic kind of topic for heated debate is of course this, and I added it more or less for fun, this kind of deployment windows. Like, should you deploy on Fridays or not? I'm sure that's been a hot topic in this CD Foundation before. It's something it's a bit of a, it usually sparks like a debate, but ignoring like the Friday discussion or not, but more fine-grained things like, yeah, you can deploy whenever you want, as long as there's like someone on call to initiate a rollback if that's what's going to be needed. Maybe not push like your most experimental feature on Black Friday and so on. And then there's organizational policies and requirements, simple things like requiring that any resource deployed, whether it's an application or if it's infrastructure, that it's properly labeled. So there's a team owning the resource. There might be a cost center, a department, and so on, so that we can kind of make an inventory of any resources deployed. Kubernetes admission control, of course, that's kind of attaches. It's more or less just one way of deploying things. So it's kind of, I think it's kind of mentioned in implicitly in a lot of these other points. So I'm not gonna delve on that today. But impact analysis, I think that's another kind of interesting type of policy we've seen a lot of, or not a lot, but things like infra cost, where you have a policy determined, or a policy say that you can't deploy resource. You can deploy resources up to like a certain amount of dollars, but if it exceeds that, you're going to need like approval from management, or maybe a colleague at least. And blast radius, another thing, like you might think it's safe to delete an unused namespace, but if it turns out like there's 200 services running in that namespace, and you might be alerted by that fact and want to investigate what's that about before you do that deletion. So that's another interesting kind of policy. And last, it's kind of a meta category, and I think I mentioned it in June when I talked here as well. And that's policy to kind of to govern the build and deployment pipelines themselves. And I think I've seen a few examples of this recently, where you have teams, and I think like with things like GitHub Actions, where your deployment or build and deployment configuration is part of your actual like application code, and it's kind of attached to that. So any team can just like they can configure their builds and deployments however they wish, which is good. Like we want team autonomy and so on, but we might still want to require certain organizational rules. Things like we might want to ensure that you can't deploy a build configuration without having like a unit test task, or without running linters, so on. So it's kind of rules on the rules. So it's pretty meta, but I think it certainly makes sense, those kind of rules as well. Yeah, so that's a couple of examples of kind of OPA being used for quality gates and yeah, in this domain.
Thank you. Good. Any questions for Anders?
Is Kubernetes admission control?
What Kubernetes admission control is? Okay, yeah, good question. So like Kubernetes is basically just an API to manage state in the etcd database. So anything you do in Kubernetes, whether it's a deployment, it's a new service, it's pretty much an API on top of a database. So any operations to kind of update, create, or update the state of that database has to go through the Kubernetes API. So when you say like create a new deployment in this namespace, you kind of ask the Kubernetes API to do that. So the Kubernetes admission control, it's one module in that API that looks at the resource about to be deployed, and then determines whether that should be allowed or not. So that's pretty much a great case for a policy admin. You see, like if you talk about things like authorization, that's largely based on like who you are and what you are entitled to do based on your roles and factors like that. While in admission control, we've already passed the stage of authorization. We know who you are, and you are authorized to do this. But at admission control stage, we look at the actual resource. So that's where we can say like, okay, you can deploy. Any deployment needs to have at least 2 replicas, and if it doesn't, we're gonna deny this deployment. And any new service needs to have needs to be in this or that namespace. It needs to be labeled with your team name, and so on. So it's kind of a gatekeeper for the Kubernetes API, and the OPA implementation for Kubernetes admission control is appropriately named gatekeeper as well. So
I have more questions on that actually. When you speak of drift control, is this specifically related to people changing, like super admins making runtime changes and not doing this through deployments or some sort of GitOps based changes?
No, I think like in many organizations, like Kubernetes admission control, that's where the kind of deployment checks are. Like that's where you put the controls and the policy rules, and then you commonly have some way of kind of replicating that in your local environment. So you don't need to kind of deploy things before knowing like this isn't going to fly because it's a violation of policy. but I think in many deployment systems, where for like Kubernetes organizations, that's where the checks are done. So you can do some static analysis at the build stage, and then you just deploy it and have the Kubernetes admission controller tell you whether that was allowed or not.
Other questions for Anders? Justin, is this helping you get what you had wanted?
It is, yeah, it is.
Okay.
One of the things that we're working on right now, I'm not sure that I would call this quite a quality gate, but is translations in the pipeline. So eBay is an international website, and most of our people don't speak all of the languages that eBay operates in. So often we will write strings in English and need to build. Basically, we write the strings in English and commit them, put it up for pull request, and then it just sits there and waits while translators do their thing, and that takes a few days, which is a bummer. And so the thing that we're currently in the process of doing is subbing in machine translations for a short term while we basically file an asynchronous to-do for the translation team to like, please provide us with the correct translations for these or validate these machine translations. And I don't have a word for what that is, what that process is. But that's we're doing a couple things along those lines as well. But yeah, this is awesome stuff. I'm happy to hear about OPA. I sent it over to our person who does pipeline things. So
Great, yeah, and again, I'd be happy to give a more thorough presentation or demo later if requested.
Thanks, Anders. Thank you for being here today. So how many of these quality gates will relate to things like checking your dependencies, doing dependency analysis?
in terms of like services behind your service, or like the software that you like, the open source software that you're using?
Yeah, open source, any software. Mm-hmm.
We have some of that. It's primarily around bill of materials validation against known CVEs. We don't have things like license checks or anything like that in the pipeline currently. And even that CVE checking is work in progress. And so we're not doing a ton of that kind of validation yet.
Okay. Anyone else? Is anyone else checking your dependencies? And you're like for CVEs, but also.
We are definitely doing that for license checks as well.
Okay.
But CVEs primarily, yes.
And are you doing that check in advance and then like tagging that dependency, that module or whatnot, a package, and then putting it in a repo to be used internally?
Yes.
How are you? Yeah.
It's done at the same time. So when the dependencies are all scanned, I mean, they're brought into a cache layer, the open source dependencies usually, And then those are scanned, and then notifications are sent out based on whether or not they meet the license requirements or meet the CVE requirements. Based on those notifications, then we make decisions on whether or not to allow downloads or whether or not to fail builds based on those.
Nice. So that's some of that would be considered some of your quality gates, would you say?
I think, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. What other ones are you using that maybe we haven't covered? Or any commentary on what we've talked about so far?
You know, I'm not familiar with like our code quality checks. I know you have Sonar in here. I need to find out what our engineering team is actually doing along those lines. Because I know there's lots of other choices to be made there. And then I'm curious, like the rollback, you know, being able to test your rollback and making sure that that works appropriately. Sometimes that gets skipped when you really need it. So that would be something I've seen in the past, not so much now, but I've definitely been on teams where we actually go through testing the rollback process as well.
Nice.
Is that a question, Melissa? Or oh.
Has anyone else see that? Will you test rollbacks? That's actually quite kind of a new concept to me. That's pretty cool. That seems pretty thorough.
Yeah, I mean, especially if there's, you know, changes that aren't so compatible, simple rollbacks may not be possible. So, you know, having a disaster plan and making sure that that actually functions when you need it, that was something that I found to be pretty important.
Yeah. And Anders, when these different quality gates, when they are triggered, what are you seeing? Are people just blocking it? Are they putting a yellow flag on it, or what is the response?
Yeah, I think the most common type of enforcement, it's just to deny the deployment entirely, because like people don't read warnings. So even if you provide them, they're just going to be ignored. So yeah, you might, like the thing that we see, like where warnings are used, that's for things like, okay, in 3 months time, this isn't going to work because we're gonna need to upgrade some system here. So making this kind of resource type like deprecated or removed. So like for things like that, issue warnings. But for anything else, it's just easier to deny and have people update their kind of deployment configuration or resource descriptions, and then have them redeployed. But I think one thing that's like really important to stress here with regards to like OPA and really like policy as code, and like a huge advantage of treating policy as code is, of course, that if you disagree with one of these rules, like, and you are a developer, like these rules are just code, and that's what you're working with. So ideally, it's not like you need to like pick up the phone or walk over to the other side of the office to the ops people or so. Like these rules should be like available for anyone to. So if you want to make a change, if you think like having, I don't know, 6 replicas as a max limit is way too low, like then you submit a PR and you to kind of have that raised, and any discussion around that rule is then like kind of kept to a PR. So and that discussion can of course then be like traced or seen by others, and others can chip in and so on. So it's kind of an idea is to kind of democratize this the whole policy process, which it's like in any like environment where I used to work, it was always like some other team, like a security team, where I didn't know any of those names, and like they were so far away in the organization. So it was pretty intimidating. It was super time consuming, and it was just a big like drain of like energy to kind of try and have anything changed. So yeah, that's definitely one of like the key points of moving policy as part of code as well. You can, it's like changing the policy should be done through familiar processes to any developer.
Yeah, it empowers the developers.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it empowers like the security team as well. It's not like we ignore them now. Like it's not a way to like sidetrack them. It empowered because they too really aren't interested in having like these walls around their policies. They want to have developers and people around them engaged in this as well, even if they might still have the final say. But I think it's for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah. Which actually, I mean, Justin was interested in both cataloging quality gates, but also giving a sense of what are best practices. And this is actually a really, I would think, a very important point for best practices, that developers and teams really have a clear insight and a clear say in the policy and an open discussion. What do you think, Justin?
I think this policy stuff is super important. It makes it so there's like a couple pieces of this. Like one is when I'm designing my pipeline, I would love to have little blocks that I can click into place and say like, yes, I will take test validation, and I will take load tests here, and I will take validation of machine translations or whatever. And then secondarily, from like an infrastructure standpoint, I would love to say, oh wait, you're doing things where you're limiting how much money someone can spend on infrastructure until they have prior approval. Well, I didn't think of that. I want that. And having like this repository of good ideas, basically in the form of a common policy language, sounds awesome. I think it's a important thing around discovery, because until I worked for a Globocorp, I didn't know about all these cool quality gates that they have full-time engineers to go build. Like when I worked at Amazon, they had like a whole load test system that like part of your deploy pipeline was like you did a full-scale load test on some of your cluster and make sure that it stands up to load. And I don't think I would have thought of that in startup world. And those sorts of learnings are valuable. So
yeah, that is so true. I've been in situations like that too, where there was a lot of trial and error, and you have to repeat the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah, one of the biggest innovations for our deployments in the Open Dev Collaboratory has been that we worked out a way to effectively deploy ephemeral copies of subsets of our infrastructure and then perform integration tests between those services. So even our configuration management and our deployment orchestration are tested that way to make sure that a change in configuration isn't going to mess up production, because we can deploy a production-like copy of those services and apply that configuration to it, and then exercise it in an automated fashion and block the configuration change from merging if those tests do not succeed.
All right, Fatih.
Right. I heard my name. I missed what was happening. I was dealing with my son.
No. Go ahead.
Out.
I was just asking for your opinion, but
yeah.
please go back to being a good parent.
Thanks.
So are we getting a sense of what would be, like Justin was looking for, some really clear best practices, or where else should we be exploring to begin to get a sense of that? Is that a direction we still want to kind of outline?
In terms of the indexing side of things, or?
Yeah. I mean, if you're in it, yeah.
Yeah, I still think there's value in kind of in cataloging some of these techniques. We're not entirely sure where that lives, but having a grab bag of like ideas for how you could build a pipeline sounds
Okay.
like,
so you're looking for, just so I have some clarity, you're looking for something similar to what you had at Amazon, and I assume you're making it at eBay, where you have some sort of centralized place to look for very good ideas for quality gates and how it's being implemented and what people are doing.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
And so, like, you know how in our like landscape views we have a bunch of like, here are the infrastructure that you could be using. And you're like, okay, well, I didn't need that, so I'll go look through these 6 projects. I'm thinking of something that's more like that, but for techniques. Of like, cool, I have Tecton. Now what do I like? How do I build it? What should my pipeline look like? Okay, great. I know I'm going to deploy to a staging server and then to production. How do I make it safe? What's the other pieces I need to like layer in to make it good? And like, what tools exist to help me with that? Or maybe like there's a link to a you should run load tests as part, like you could run load tests as part of your pipeline. Here is an example in Tecton and another one in Argo for how to do that. Those things seem awesome. It would be really, really helpful to have. And so I'm thinking maybe the result of this is a page on the CD Foundation with a list of quality gates, or I guess like instead of quality gates, we might call them like building blocks for a pipeline. Like what are the Lego pieces that I can have access to? That's kind of my thought. Yeah,
we at the CDF we're creating best practices. So the best practices, SIG is actually working on its own entire set of these sort of things. It sounds like very related to that, which is great, because actually we could work on the quality gates here and then contribute it to the best practices SIG and sort of see how it fits in with what they're doing as well. And they have a start of like a Hugo site. So
and I seem to remember that there was a group who was putting a bunch of effort into terminology for what, like, is the term quality gate the thing that is that the term? I don't know if that's the term. That's the one that I use.
Yeah, the event SIG is actually doing a lot around vocabulary for CD events, as sort of groundwork for CD events. So that's been really interesting, actually, and really useful to see how different tools or different even groups like teams will use different nomenclature. Yeah, the question on quality gates immediately came up at another meeting. I mentioned it to Oleg, and he was like, oh, this comment, Captain is reviewing the term. Like, I think that term actually came from Captain, or, they were one of the first users of it. And it's like a commonly understood term, but apparently it's under review with them. So it's interesting how different tools and teams will use different words to describe very similar things, and then also how words themselves come in another fashion or just get refined in their use.
I have a question actually, like just when you mentioned Kara, I think Anne-Marie started this pipeline step and stage terminology work in SIG interoperability, and those PRs are still open. The PRs don't say like gates and so on, but some of those things she started working there, like are in our gates as a like build gates. She has a build stage there. So I don't know like how. Let me put the links to chat.
I know, I'm like looking. I know it's in here in the Slack somewhere.
Because like
is it in the chat? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, she also calls, she has a gate word there as alias in one of the, a policy, under policy, for example. Like if you haven't looked at it, it's pretty extensive document, which is really cool.
Are you looking at stage or steps right now?
I am on step types. I see gate there under policy. If you search for policy, I think it should come up.
My computer's being super slow.
Or it's one big change.
Sorry, my computer's being a bit funny.
It seems to be a little finer grained than what I would call a quality gate.
Yeah, it's like there is another PR. The other PR is talking about stages. I think that looks at a broader, bigger thingy. Like again, stage.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it may map some way.
Yeah. So the stages are like build, like state, like production release, and they're like the big chunks of the pipeline. And then this step terminology is like a quality gate is made up of steps. And so you might have like a an analyze step, and then you might provision something so you can sign. And those are 3 different steps that you would take. But the quality gates themselves I don't know. It seems like there's a middle piece of that hierarchy. Or maybe like 6 of the 10 of these are quality gates and the others aren't. Maybe it's a qualifier on the types of step.
It's a tough one too. Steps imply to me, sequential activities, and the quality gates may not necessarily be in a certain order, or may be composed of steps at the beginning and at the end, in order to encompass an idea. So yeah, how would we categorize our quality gates? Would they be, ideas, for particular stages of the development cycle, or are they like all-encompassing ideas that, somehow in your pipeline need to be addressed?
Yeah, I think that some of them imply location. They imply stages. Like you're not going to run a load test during your build stage. You're going to wait until it's deployed somewhere. And You're probably not going to run your unit tests after on your prod deploy. We're going to do that earlier. So I think there's an implication, but not a requirement.
And that would lead into best practices too. Like, when do you actually analyze your components? Do you analyze them after it's ready for production, or do you need to, obviously push that left and make sure you do that sooner in the process?
Yeah. Comment on that pull request and conversation.
I'm sorry. I think you cut out there.
Oh, sorry. I said I'm going to comment on this pull request and have the conversation there, because
Yeah, that sounds good.
I am not nearly as motivated as the person who did all this work already. They've done an awesome job and more than I've thought about it.
That's right. Okay. Just to quickly wrap up, because we are running out of time. Do we have any last questions or anything to ask of Andrew since he's here with us today? You're welcome to come back anytime you want as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Nice to have you.
Thanks. Great to be here. Yeah, let's schedule a more like of a presentation or demo, like in a month or two, if you're interested.
Okay. Yeah, sounds great. That sounds really good. Okay, I'll be in touch with you for that. I'll put an action item for me. The last, just quickly before we wrap up, the CFB for CDCon ends tomorrow, midnight. It might be midnight US time. On that page, it gives you the exact time. But please do submit if you haven't yet submitted. We do want all your talks, especially on interoperability. It'd be great to see you at CDCon. So, definitely submit. Here's just some more information on CD events, which is going apace. I bring it up here because I feel like there's a ton of overlap. CD events the events they kind of grew out of this one, and we're all working in the very same space, for example, on the vocabulary. So please do look at what their CD events that they're building out, because it should be a really good project. It's quite exciting. Trying to get more and more interoperability in CI/CD. So it's very good. To that point also, we're going to have a full day at KubeCon on CD events, and we're working out the schedule right now. So it'll be sort of a combination between talks and more hands-on workshopping probably. But that's being worked out. So if you are at KubeCon, free one-day event, please do join us. It would be great to see you there as well. And we've had our excellent discussion. So that was all my sort of reminders for you all, I guess, and calls to get more involved. But if you have any questions on any of that, please don't hesitate to ask now or ping me. Good. All right. Thank you all very much. And thank you especially to Anders for coming and discussing with us. That was really awesome. I certainly learned more about quality gates than I knew. So thank you. It's a really good discussion. Thanks, Justin, for kicking it off.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
To be here.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.